Resolution view showing several craters, including this large one. This is where we'll focus our attention for the moment, because we have a high-resolution strip image here in the white box that came out across the desert floor, down the crater wall, and out over this this dark area here. Let's see. Notice the weird dark shape here. Our strip image just samples that dark area here. And when we look at the high-resolution strip image, there is nothing to see in this part. It's just sand, some undulations in the sand, some small craters of no significance. Then it gets darker as you go down the wall of the crater. Then you go out on the floor of the crater, and you come to this dark area, and what do we see in that dark area? We see this. This is just the end of that dark flow area on the floor of the crater. Very unusual formations, I'm sure you'll agree. Also, the suddenness with which they end and the contrast of the white areas here, almost frost-like, and the black area. Many theories have been put forward to explain them. The vegetative one is doing well because not this particular one, but some of the places where these spots are seen, they have now been photographed at different seasons, and indeed they grow in the spring, peak in the summer, fade away in the fall, and are mostly gone in the winter. Here's another place where we have spots in one of the winter seasons, and here's a place where we have spots in a summer season. This almost looks like it's melted at some point, and we have a flow feature. Here are some more spots. This feature is blown up in here so we can see it in high resolution. This is a completely different feature showing what looked like almost an organized field of triangular-looking spots. Maybe a different thing altogether. There are many places on Mars where there are tracks, and when we view them at high resolution, they look to be a bit more than just, as the going theory has it, dust devil tracks. There are even little, if you will, tread-like marks in the interior. It has been suggested that these represent the movement locations of machinery. We don't know what they are, but there is a curious tendency to clip to pass tangentially by the edges of craters. We see that repeated far more often than ought to be chance. Here are several of these tracks in a low-resolution view, showing that they go over long distances and roughly parallel one another. The little white box you see in there, right there, this track is shown in high resolution over here, and even though that was sort of a random point on this track to catch with the spacecraft, we see that again it's perfectly tangent to a crater where the track goes by. So these things don't seem to go randomly across the surface, but tangentially by craters. You can see that behavior in other places here too. There are some other tracks too, and a curious feature of these, besides their splitting and in this case right angle bends, is that they're often accompanied by these spot-like or shrub-like things that are almost reminiscent of the way we line our highways and roads with vegetation. That pattern is seen often. Here's another track or trail, and even more vegetative-looking stuff by the side. This vegetative pattern continues into larger forms. We see some here and here. Here it almost looks like structure within the vegetation, evidence of individual branches. And in fact, we see that certainly in looking at this object. It has a central trunk-like area branching from that. And most telling of all, since the original explanation thrown out for this was a crystalline structure on the ground, but these things cast shadows, indicating that they're well off the ground. In fact, this is perhaps a couple hundred meters across and maybe 80 meters above the ground. About this feature, it's so remarkably like what a tree would look like seen from above, that Arthur C. Clarke, the well-known science fiction author, gave this quote recently: "The recent discovery of life in the most improbable places, especially far down inside the Earth's crust, has now convinced me that we have been equally short-sighted. Some of the amazing images from the Mars Surveyor, especially the one we just saw, make me 95% sure that there are extensive areas of vegetation or its equivalent on Mars." In this section, let's see if I can get the title to come up. Yes, all right. Possible infrastructure remnants. I'll go through this quickly. These are alleged to be dust devil tracks, but there's also some little objects in here, and those are supposed to be boulders. But when you view them at high resolution, they tend to be rather rectangular, almost uniformly throughout this. It looks almost like structures or buildings, and interestingly, where the buildings cluster, the tracks intersect more often. It's very reminiscent of what archaeologists find on Earth when they're finding remnants of ancient civilizations. Here are layers of rectangular things at all scales, big things with little things on their backs and littler things on their backs and so on, many different scales. Here are instances of honeycomb-like patterns and other rectangular things. Here are things suggestive of large containers or enclosures, almost the way reservoirs would look on Earth if they were long abandoned. In fact, there are things that look almost like viaducts with tread marks across them, separating the various reservoirs, if you will. Here's a valley. Okay. A place with an area that's blown up over here. Has quite a few rectangular and high reflectivity objects within it. A field of triangles that are not at all randomly distributed but tend to line up in arcs or curves and then have linearity to them. It's been suggested those are obelisks casting shadows, but does that make them any less anomalous? All right. Our second last section here is patterns and symbols. This contains a couple of interesting items I'd like to show you. Here is a view of a hexagonal crater, and in it we notice some interesting white stripes in the interior of the hexagonal crater, and happen to get a later view at higher resolution. It's almost as if that's where they wrote "Made on Mars." Notice these white striped things on the exterior too. Here are some objects that look very symbolic in character, as do these, but I'll show you the best example we have yet. This is the area right behind the D&M pyramid. Notice this V-shaped object and the dark markings right above. I've blown that up in higher magnification here. V-shaped object, dark markings. We see other dark markings over here. To concentrate on the dark markings, this almost looks like a capital B. This one looks like a P. This one looks like an A. This one looks like an F, possibly followed by an A. These are, I showed these because they're rather Romanesque. Some of the others are not at all recognizable or look like things from other alphabets, but there's a limited number of ways you can make alphabetic characters from a few lines and circles. This was the best we had without doing any tricks with the imagery. But one day someone was using a video camera and photographing my screen, and it showed the image much better. And we realized that the video camera, not having any thought at all to what was in the image, was using a noise filter to clean up what it thought was a noisy background. And when we did the same thing with the computer, it cleaned up the image nicely, showing that indeed the objects that look symbolic in character do show up rather distinctly from the background. The debate is obviously furious about whether or not these are real symbols or chance artifacts of nature. But obviously, if they are symbols, then it's game, set, and match for artificiality. This section is about glassy stripes and tubes. And I'll just show you a few of these. When these are just barely in contact with the surface, we see these parallel white stripes in many places on Mars. But wherever the surface is broken and fissured, we see what lies below, and it's these glassy tube-like objects. This one is shown in a blow-up over here. The white stripes are what we see on the surface, but they are glassy because faintly through them you can see that the stripes go all the way around, and they're translucent. You can see through them. This looks like a specular reflection of sunlight, which would mean that it's not natural materials, but highly reflective materials. Here again you can see the glassy character and the striping character. There are many examples of these here, and these on a mesa at Cydonia. You can see that they cast shadows. Here they network. They're perpendicular here. They're seen in many sizes here. And in this instance, you can see the networking. There's one instance here where the white stripes go in one direction here and the opposite direction here. So we have a crosshatch pattern, which obviously shows that we can see through these things, and also that it's very difficult for most natural formation mechanisms to make things that crisscross one another. Here's a case where the tube seems to be broken by this object, and this is a collapsed tube, and this is an intact tube that's severed at this point. This is an artist concept. Coloration always indicates artists have had a go at it. Here's a shape in context and cut out. Looks a bit like a seahorse. You'd say, well, that's pretty imaginative. But actually, it's from an area in which there is a kind of dividing line, like a watermark level. And above that, you see things like the stripes here suggestive of a waterfall, of glaciers, of mountains, of a sky with stars in it. Things below look like aquatic things. There are many images suggestive of aquatic creatures, such as this dolphin. And they're all one of the things that suggests artificiality to these things, rather than just imagination, is the relationships to one another. They're organized. There's an aquatic area, there's an insect area, a mammal area, and so on. This is another object from one of those areas. This on the left is the original image, and on the vegetative one is doing well because not this particular one, but some of the places where these spots are seen, they have now been photographed at different seasons, and indeed they grow in the spring, peak in the summer, fade away in the fall, and are mostly gone in the winter. Here's another place where we have spots in one of the winter seasons, and here's a place where we have spots in a summer season. This almost looks like it's melted at some point, and we have a flow feature. Here are some more spots. This feature is blown up in here so we can see it in high resolution. This is a completely different feature showing what looked like almost an organized field of triangular-looking spots. Maybe a different thing. Our strip image just samples that dark area here. And when we look at the high-resolution strip image, there is nothing to see in this part. It's just sand, some undulations in the sand, some small craters of no significance. Then it gets darker as you go down the wall of the crater. Then you go out on the floor of the crater, and you come to this dark area, and what do we see in that dark area? We see this. Resolution view showing several craters, including this large one. This is where we'll focus our attention for the moment, because we have a high-resolution strip image here in the white box that came out across the desert floor, down the crater wall, and out over this this dark area here. Let's see. Notice the weird dark shape here. This is just the end of that dark flow area on the floor of the crater. Very unusual formations, I'm sure you'll agree. Also, the suddenness with which they end and the contrast of the white areas here, almost frost-like, and the black area. Many theories have been put forward to explain them.